Hi, welcome to my channel. I've filmed this intro a bunch because I'm awkward, but today I really wanted to talk about the fact that my therapist doesn't think I'm autistic, because I think that for a lot of us autistic people, we have mental health issues because of the way that society is for us, and when we're trying to get help for those things, it can really suck to have someone tell you like, oh well, you're not autistic, and it can definitely be like weird and damaging and just not great in a lot of ways. And I haven't seen anyone talk about it. I think that in like the autistic community there's like a stigma around saying that like, oh, such and such doesn't think I'm autistic, because we have such like a discourse about, oh, if you're not diagnosed then you're not autistic, and like there's all these various discourses about what counts as being autistic enough. So I feel like a lot of us don't want to say like, well, this person that's like medically trained and knows things about like neurodiversity and mental health and so on and so forth doesn't think I'm autistic. But I feel like it's important to talk about, because I think especially autistic girls are gonna face this if we like reach out for help at some point. It's quite likely that you'll experience it. I want to preface all this by saying that I really am very, very happy with my therapist in every aspect other than this one. She is very well trained, she's incredibly educated, and I trust her opinion 100% other than this one thing. I think most people that have had therapy or have had like prolonged mental health issues, you know that like therapy is touch and go. You know, I'm turning 24 next month, and I've had various different counsellors and therapists and CBT and so on and so forth since I was about 12. So I think I know by now what a good therapist and bad therapist like feels like to be with. And she's absolutely a great therapist, by far the best I've had so far. I've been jibbed off and messed around by the system and by the NHS and by a lot of different things. I've had some bad therapists where I've sat there and just as they're talking, I'm like, they don't know what they're talking about. You know, like I've had people tell me if I made more friends, my anxiety and depression would go away. I've had people tell me like, I just need to think like more positively, and suddenly I'll be able to like get out of bed and interact with people and everything's gonna be great. And she doesn't do any of that. When she speaks to me, when she talks through things with me, when she tells me like, this is what this is, I'm like, oh wow, I've learned something here from my therapist, because she is brilliant. This is not at all shitting on my therapist. This is me shitting on the fact that even someone who is incredibly well trained and incredibly educated and is obviously like very, very smart and clever and knows what she's talking about, still doesn't think I'm autistic based on essentially the male conditioning and the male interpretation of autism. She hasn't given me like a full rundown of like, here's why I don't think you're autistic. It's been very touch and go throughout various sessions because she doesn't want to talk about me being autistic, which in some ways I greatly appreciate, because I do think that my anxiety and depression are somewhat detached from my autism personally, and they're things that I need to approach without looking at being autistic. And there's also the fact that like my diagnosis was hugely like freeing and liberating for me, because it explains so much of my life, like so many things I could look back on and be like, oh, it's the autism, oh, it's because I'm autistic. And it's been really great for me to be diagnosed, but I still think it's important for me personally to not fall into like, oh well, I am anxious because of my autism, I am depressed because I'm autistic. Like, I just think that would be a bad path for me to go down personally, because that's not the reason. So in some ways, I really appreciate that she just doesn't really bring up autism during the session. But every now and again when it is mentioned, it's her saying that she doesn't think I'm autistic because of the way I react, because of the way that I smile in sessions, because I have emotions, and because the big one is that because I care and to a degree understand other people's emotions. All of which are things that you can still do and have as an autistic person, for one. And secondly, they're all things that we know like are common with autistic girls. Especially like, I'm not naturally a happy, smiley, laughy person, which I am like, I need to be entertaining for a video, so there's a degree of a persona. But in everyday life and in my therapy sessions, that's a mask. That's me like trying to be like, okay, this is who I'm supposed to be in this situation, because I don't know how like me, Dana, the person, the autistic person, would react in that situation. So I have to like cut that off. I have to like withdraw back into my memory and be like, okay, so like people act like this, and this is how like girls are, and this is how people are, so this is how I'll act in this situation. And it's not as conscious as that, it's very much a subconscious choice. But as soon as I started reading about masking and autistic girls, I was like, oh, that's what I'm doing. So it does feel somewhat, I don't want to say insulting, because I don't feel insulted by my therapist. Like I say, I really like her. But it does feel like it's another way in which someone's looking at the very, very surface and saying, oh, well, you're not autistic because you smile and you care about people's emotions. And we all know by now that being autistic does not mean just having a complete lack of empathy and being a robot. Like, it's such a TV, like, Sheldon Cooper fucking way of looking at autism. But then the thing that comes after that is, if my therapist is educated and clever and knows all of this stuff, why would she then not think I'm autistic when, to me, it's something that's quite, I don't want to say obvious, because obviously there's a mask there. I'm not being my true autistic self in front of people. But I still feel like my life experiences and the way that I view the world and lots of other things all play with the fact that I'm autistic. Like, none of my worldviews are just because I'm autistic. You know, there's the way I've been raised, the way that the people I'm around, the way that I am as a person, as an individual. But autism still like kind of weaves through all of that because I am autistic. Every part of my life has something to do with autism in some way or another, because that's part of who I am. And it's very, it's really strange to me that other people don't see that, especially when, like, my therapist doesn't see that, but to my family, as soon as I got my autism diagnosis, it was, of course you are. And to lots of different people around me, I've had a lot of different reactions, you know. Not everyone's immediately been like, oh yeah, of course, although that's the main reaction I had. You know, my boyfriend's autistic, and as soon as I got the diagnosis, he was like, well, yeah, we knew this. My brother's autistic, and he was like, we knew this was coming. But then, like, I had a guy in work that was like, well, you don't, like, seem autistic. And obviously my therapist doesn't think I'm autistic. I don't know, I feel like a lot of me is clearly autistic, essentially, once you know what you're looking for. But that's where we come on to why I think my therapist doesn't think I'm autistic, which is a combination of things. And I've got to say that I really think the main one is that because she is incredibly educated, she's been educated about autism, and we all know that the general like education board on autism is not only incredibly male focused, but also like largely kind of wrong. We're so often depicted as being these emotionless husks of like just flesh wandering around, like not understanding people, not caring to understand people, and just liking trains. And obviously she will have learned way beyond that, because she is a medical and well-trained educated professional. But she still learnt the male-focused version of autism, which explains that, like, we don't care about other people's emotions, we don't understand other people's emotions, we don't have a wide, varied range of emotions ourselves. Which I do. I think most autistic people do. They may not be emotions in the way that people expect. We may not care about them or see them in the way that people expect, but we still are people. So I don't feel at all let down by my therapist not thinking that I'm autistic. But I do feel like the system that educates the people that then go on to help autistic people and anyone who has a mental health issue, like a therapist does, and obviously therapists also see people that don't have any mental health issues, they should be provided with a better education on what autism is and a lot of other neurodiversities and other mental health conditions, obviously. But we talk about autism here, because the way people talk about autism is very basis. It's the very base level of what an autistic person is. It often dehumanises or completely infantilises us. It's not good. Like, it's not good. And it leads to things like this, where I have times in therapy where I'd love to explain, like, this is how my autism affects me, and I don't feel able to because she doesn't think I'm autistic. And again, no judgment or shittiness on her, because she's been so immensely helpful to me and continues to be immensely helpful. But if we don't talk about the little things that aren't quite right, like, where does that end? How big can the things get that we let slide? It's good to talk about things and discuss things and bring things up, and that's what I'm trying to do here. Because I just think it can be really damaging, because, like, fair enough for me, my autism I don't think plays that much into my mental health, and that means that because we're having therapy sessions approaching my anxiety, I don't think it matters that much whether or not we talk about my autism. And as a person in general, I think that a lot of my past experiences were caused by my autism, by being autistic, by being an autistic person trying to survive and thrive in a society that isn't built for me. But I don't so much feel like that now. In some ways, I'm like, yeah, my autism like absolutely fucks me over here. But in most ways, and especially in the things I approach with my therapist, I don't feel like it plays that much into it. So it's not an issue for me, really. Like, it'd be nice if she was like, oh yeah, you're autistic, because it's that extra validation for me. Because we all have the times when we're like, oh my God, what if I'm not? But obviously I'm fairly comfortable in being an autistic person, so it doesn't bother me that much. But to other people, I feel like it could be really damaging. And again, my therapist is great. I'm sure if someone told her like, no, I'm definitely autistic, I don't like when you say that, she wouldn't keep saying it. She's not going to be an asshole. But other therapists and other people, it's just not good. You know, telling someone that they're not autistic when they've received a diagnosis that explains so much for them could completely set them back. It could do a lot of things to them. It could completely change their worldview. It could change the way that they view themselves. It could change the way they view other autistic people, especially if you've been in like the autistic community and made autistic friends. It can affect all that. And that's why I think it's so important to not only be raising awareness of like the full encompassment that is autism, but also important to raise the fact that, like, especially for girls, we keep getting just flowing under the radar constantly. Even when you've received a diagnosis that you're very comfortable with and that explains so much, you can still very easily just have someone go, no, that's not right. Purely because I don't exhibit my autism symptoms in the same way that a man does, or the same way that we're taught to expect men to do. You know, and even like there's that recent study where they found that like most autistic people tend to have a higher like value of morals and they won't lie as often and so on and so forth. Even that's spun to make us look bad and to try and make us look like we're more naive or we're more childish or whatever. I don't know anymore. I don't know what the neurotypicals are trying here. But even as education tries to push forth and studies push forth about autism, not only are they not being led or assisted usually by autistic people from what I've seen, but they're not even really trying to study things that would actually help us in our day-to-day lives or with surviving in society. They're very base level things to try and help neurotypicals understand us better without actually approaching what they need to know to understand us better. And there is, of course, a lot more to it than just people aren't properly educated about autism. There's all of the stigma that leads to things not being studied correctly and leads to autistic people being left out of the conversation. And especially when you get into the autism mommies and all that shit. But the baseline of things is that retracting almost someone's diagnosis, like obviously it's not an official capacity, her opinion doesn't really matter that much. Like it does to me because I like her and she's my therapist. But it's not the opinion that matters, it's the reason behind the opinion is what I'm trying to say here. That's what this whole video is about. You know, and even though I say my autism isn't tied that much into my mental health, there's still so many times when it is. There's days where, like, for example, I had a panic attack last Wednesday and we were talking about that in my session, and I would have loved to be able to say to her, like, this was an autistic meltdown. This wasn't just a panic attack. This was things building up for me until I was completely overwhelmed by, like, everything around me and I had a complete meltdown. But I couldn't. I had to phrase it as, like, I had a panic attack. And I mean, it wasn't not a panic attack, but it wasn't just a panic attack either. It was tied in with me being autistic. So that, combined with the fact that I'm already masking in a session, it feels like my therapist isn't even seeing enough of who I actually am to decide that, which is no fault of hers. It's me. It's me not putting my full representation of who I am in front of her because I can't. Like, I don't go into it being like, I'm gonna like set myself up now, this is gonna be my therapy phase. Like, I try to go into it as myself, but that mask just slips on anyway because I'm autistic. And especially, like, at one point she said, well, you maintain eye contact quite well. We do in Zoom right now, honey. I'm staring at a screen. If she was in front of me, I would not be looking at her eyes. Like, I struggle to look at a camera for a prolonged period of time. And I can't do eye contact. And even having explained like the whole eye contact thing to him and being like, so much of it I can't explain, like to a degree it's that it makes me anxious, and as soon as I've made eye contact I'm then thinking like, how long should I hold this for? Will it be weird if I look away? Will they think I'm not listening? All of that's playing in my head. And even having explained that, she's like, what's your anxiety? And I'm like, honey, I think it's my autism. Hopefully I've said everything I was trying to say. I had a whole thing in my head of how this was gonna go, and it's been a lot of disjointed sentences where I've forgotten what I just said. So apologies if it's a little choppy and a little like 2010, like I'm over here. I don't think I moved that much, so it should be okay. I think my general point for the like too long didn't read, my therapist doesn't think I'm autistic because education about autism in girls isn't good enough, and that should change. But I still really like my therapist and find her super helpful. Thanks for watching. Feel free to like hit the subscribe button, follow me, I don't know. It'd be nice if you stuck around because I am trying to like do something here.